It is with a heavy heart that I address you today, because the world around us is filled with deception, and many times that deception comes from the people we trust most, our friends, our families. You see, the enemy is clever. He doesn't always show up in the form of something frightening or obvious. No, the devil often comes disguised as someone we know and love, someone we'd least expect to harm us. It is crucial, my friends, that we learn to discern these hidden dangers. There are subtle signs that reveal the presence of evil, even within those closest to us. When you see anger rise up without cause, bitterness brewing in places where love should be, or jealousy twisting a pure heart into something darker, you are witnessing the work of destructive forces. These traits are not of God. They are the signs of spirits that seek to divide, to conquer, to sow discord where unity once stood. When a person speaks words that bring down rather than build up, that's a red flag. Words have power. The Bible tells us that life and death are in the tongue. If someone constantly speaks of destruction, gossip, or division, beware. The enemy's voice is often hidden in those words, subtly guiding hearts away from peace, joy, and love. But it's not just about words, it's also about the fruit of one's life. Do you see fruit of kindness, gentleness, and humility? Or do you see a life marked by selfishness, pride, and greed? The fruits we bear reveal who we truly serve. If the fruit is rotten, you can be sure the root is as well. Friends, family, no one is exempt from the temptation of sin. And when those closest to us fall prey to it, we must not ignore the signs. Love does not turn a blind eye. The enemy loves to create confusion in the heart, to make us doubt our convictions, to make us question what we know is right. If you find that someone is consistently trying to pull you away from your faith, from your convictions, from your moral compass, know that this is not from God. Satan works through those closest to us because they have access to our hearts. He knows how to exploit our weaknesses. He knows how to manipulate emotions and twist truth. It is crucial, my friends, that we arm ourselves with discernment. We must be in constant prayer, asking the Lord to give us wisdom, to help us see through the veil of deception. Our hearts must be grounded in truth. If we let the deceit of this world infiltrate our homes and friendships, we open ourselves to darkness. But when we stand firm, when we keep our eyes fixed on the light, we can resist the devil's schemes. Take courage, for we do not fight this battle alone. The same God who delivered his people time and time again is with us now. He has given us his word, he has given us his spirit, and he has given us the power to stand firm against the forces of evil, even when they come disguised as those we love most. Words have power. They can lift a person up or tear them down, bring healing or cause wounds that last a lifetime. From the very beginning, words have shaped the world we live in. God spoke creation into existence. And the enemy, too, understands the power of words, using them as weapons of deception, manipulation, and destruction. One of the clearest signs of demonic influence in a person is the way they speak and act toward others. Destructive words and actions are not merely personality traits or bad habits. They can be evidence of something much deeper. When you see someone constantly tearing others down, spreading lies, gossiping, or speaking with hatred, it is often a sign of a spiritual stronghold. The enemy thrives in environments where negativity, division, and strife are present. A person who is under the influence of demonic forces may use words to manipulate and control others. This is how the devil operates, by twisting truth, sowing confusion, and making evil seem good and good seem evil. You may notice this in a friend or family member who always finds a way to shift blame make others feel guilty for things they didn't do, or distort reality to suit their own agenda. They may speak with charm and persuasion, yet behind their words lies deceit and selfish intent. Another sign is the use of constant criticism and discouragement. When a person cannot celebrate the successes of others, when they always find something wrong, when they take pleasure in making others feel small, it is a reflection of the darkness within them. God's Spirit produces encouragement and edification, while the enemy seeks to destroy confidence, crush hope, and instill doubt. A person who is frequently critical, harsh, and condemning is often operating under a spirit that does not align with God's truth. Beyond words, actions also reveal the presence of demonic influence. People who habitually stir up conflict, provoke arguments, or create division within families and friendships are not acting under the influence of God's Spirit. The Bible says that where there is strife, there is every kind of evil. When you see someone who thrives on chaos, who enjoys seeing others in pain, or who seems to feed off of drama and destruction, it is not just a personality trait, it is something more sinister at work. Violence, whether physical or emotional, is another indication. The enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, and he uses people to accomplish this. When you see someone who lacks self-control, who explodes in rage, who abuses others verbally, emotionally, or physically, you are witnessing the fruit of darkness. Love, patience, and kindness come from God, but hatred, aggression, and cruelty are signs of a different influence. Another subtle but dangerous form of destructive behavior is manipulation through guilt and emotional control. A person under demonic influence may use words to make others feel trapped, obligated, or responsible for their happiness. They may twist situations to make themselves the victim even when they are the ones causing harm. This is a tactic of the enemy, keeping people bound in toxic relationships where they feel they can never do enough, never be good enough, and never find true peace. Destructive words and actions can also manifest in deception. Lies are the language of the devil, and when a person constantly twists the truth, exaggerates, or deceives, they are aligning themselves with darkness. The enemy has always worked through deception, from the Garden of Eden to the present day. If someone in your life is consistently dishonest, if they manipulate facts to serve their own desires, or if they lead others astray with false promises, their words are being influenced by something beyond the natural. Pay attention to how people speak about others. Do they build up or do they tear down? Do they seek to restore relationships or do they delight in spreading division? A person who takes pleasure in slandering others, who thrives on gossip and the destruction of reputations, is doing the work of the enemy. The Bible warns that the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity that can set an entire course of destruction. If someone close to you consistently speaks words of harm, watch carefully. It is a spiritual matter, not just a personality flaw. The presence of destructive words and actions is not something to take lightly. They reveal what is in the heart. And when the heart is filled with darkness, the mouth will speak accordingly. It is important to recognize these signs, not with a spirit of judgment, but with discernment. Not every harsh word or unkind action is a sign of demonic influence. But when you see a consistent pattern of negativity, cruelty, and deception, understand that there is something deeper at work. Evil operates through people just as good does. The enemy looks for those he can use to sow division, hurt, and despair. He speaks through their words, works through their actions, and influences their attitudes. Recognizing this is the first step to breaking free from its effects. Whether it is a friend, a family member, or even yourself, the only way to combat destructive words and actions is through truth, prayer, and the power of God's Spirit. Darkness cannot hide when the light of truth shines upon it. Be watchful, be discerning, and do not be deceived by the smooth words or familiar faces through which the enemy may try to work. Anger itself is not always evil. There are times when righteous anger is necessary, when injustice or wrongdoing stirs something deep inside. Even Jesus displayed anger when he overturned the tables in the temple, but his anger was pure, controlled, and guided by truth. The kind of anger that becomes dangerous is the kind that takes root in the heart, grows unchecked, and turns into something far more sinister. Hatred. When anger is left to fester, it becomes a doorway for demonic influence. And that influence can manifest in the people closest to us. One of the most telling signs of spiritual oppression is when someone cannot control their temper. This is not just occasional frustration or moment of irritation. This is an ongoing, deep-seated rage that seems to erupt at the slightest provocation. It is the kind of anger that lashes out with no concern for the damage it causes. It is unpredictable, destructive, and unrelenting. You may have witnessed it in a family member whose fury is like a storm, leaving behind wounds and brokenness. You may have seen it in a friend who cannot seem to let go of grudges, whose heart is hardened with bitterness, unable to forgive even the smallest offense. Hatred follows closely behind uncontrollable anger. It does not need a logical reason to exist. Sometimes people will carry hate for others simply because of differences in opinion, background, or even success. A person consumed by hate sees enemies where there are none. They allow resentment to control their thoughts, dictate their actions, and poison their relationships. This is not a natural way to live. It is the work of an unseen force that seeks to divide, destroy, and isolate. The enemy loves to use anger to create division. He knows that an angry heart is a blind heart, unable to see truth clearly. A person controlled by anger cannot think rationally, cannot discern wisely, and cannot hear the voice of God over the noise of their own rage. The enemy will whisper lies, fueling their resentment, making them believe they are justified in their wrath, when in reality they are being led deeper into spiritual darkness. One of the ways you can recognize this influence is in how anger manifests in behavior. A person under the grip of uncontrollable rage often lashes out, not just with words, but with physical aggression. They throw things, break things, hurt people, sometimes with their hands, sometimes with their words, sometimes with their silence. Their presence feels like a ticking time bomb, and those around them live in fear, never knowing what might set them off. But rage doesn't always explode outward. Sometimes it is buried deep within, turning into a silent but deadly force. It can transform into passive aggression, deep-seated resentment, or even self-hatred. It isolates people, making them cold, distant, and unapproachable. A person filled with internalized anger often feels empty, as if nothing in life truly satisfies them. They struggle to experience joy because bitterness has taken up too much space in their soul. They become cynical, unable to believe in the goodness of others, always expecting the worst. The enemy uses anger to create strongholds in families. Many broken homes are the result of anger passed down from one generation to another. A father who is consumed by rage often raises children who either become the same or live in fear of becoming like him. A mother who nurtures bitterness in her heart teaches her children to do the same. The cycle continues, and the enemy rejoices because he knows that as long as anger rules, love cannot flourish. Hatred is a poison that spreads. It starts small. Maybe it's a single offense that was never dealt with properly. Over time, that offense grows, turning into resentment, then bitterness, then full-fledged hatred. It can consume a person so completely that they no longer see individuals, only enemies. A person controlled by hate will often justify cruelty. They will say things like, "They deserve it," or "I'll never forgive them." They may even enjoy seeing others suffer, taking pleasure in the pain of those they believe have wronged them. What makes this so dangerous is that hatred does not stay confined to just one person. It spills over into every relationship, affecting friendships, marriages, and even entire communities. It hardens hearts, making reconciliation nearly impossible. The enemy thrives in this environment because where there is no forgiveness, there can be no peace. A person consumed by anger and hatred will often resist correction. If you try to speak truth to them, they will become defensive, sometimes even violent. They do not want to hear words of wisdom because their hearts are already set on destruction. They justify their anger, refusing to let it go because the enemy has convinced them that their rage is their strength. But in reality, it is their prison. This is why it is so important to recognize these signs in the people around us. When someone is trapped in uncontrollable anger and hatred, they are not just dealing with an emotional struggle, they are in a spiritual battle. They are being used as a vessel for darkness, whether they realize it or not. And if left unchecked, that darkness will consume them completely. It is not our place to condemn, but it is our responsibility to be aware. Recognizing these signs is the first step in breaking the stronghold of anger and hatred. We cannot allow the enemy to use our friends and family as tools of destruction. Darkness only prevails where there is no light. And when truth is spoken, when love is demonstrated, when forgiveness is offered, the grip of anger begins to break. Temptation has always been one of the enemy's greatest weapons. It is subtle, persistent, and often disguised as something harmless or even desirable. The devil knows that a single temptation, if entertained long enough, can lead to destruction, but he rarely comes in an obvious way. He doesn't always attack with force. Instead, he works through the people closest to us, using their words, their actions, and even their love to lead us astray. The greatest danger is not the temptations that come once and pass, but those that remain, constantly pulling, whispering, and wearing down resistance until they finally take root. The enemy knows that people are more likely to be influenced by those they trust. This is why temptation often comes through friends, family, and those we care about. It is easy to resist temptation from a stranger, but when it comes from someone close, it is harder to see it for what it is. The people around us can influence our thoughts, our behaviors, and our decisions, whether for good or for evil. A friend who constantly encourages sinful behavior, a family member who pressures us to compromise, a loved one who downplays the seriousness of sin. These are all ways the enemy works to weaken spiritual foundations. Sometimes temptation takes the form of seemingly small compromises. A friend might say, "It's just one drink, it's just a joke," or "No one will ever know." At first it seems insignificant, but small compromises lead to greater ones. The enemy never demands immediate surrender. He simply asks for one step in the wrong direction. Over time, those steps become a path, and that path leads to destruction. What starts as an innocent indulgence becomes a habit. What begins as a little bending of the truth turns into a lifestyle of deceit. And before a person realizes it, they are trapped. Another way temptation works is through peer pressure. Many people find themselves in situations where they feel obligated to go along with things they know are wrong simply because they don't want to disappoint, offend, or lose relationships. The enemy takes advantage of this desire for acceptance. He uses people to make sin look normal, acceptable, and even enjoyable. He convinces people that they are missing out if they don't participate. He whispers lies through the voices of friends who say, "You're too uptight. Stop being so serious." Or, "Everyone does it." Temptation also comes through relationships that pull a person away from their faith. The wrong friendships, romantic relationships, or business partnerships can lead a person into darkness. It doesn't always happen instantly, but little by little, their values shift. The things they once stood against become tolerable. The things they once pursued wholeheartedly become less important. The enemy works through influence, and if a person surrounds themselves with those who reject truth, they will eventually be drawn into that same deception. Even within families, there can be pressures that lead people away from what is right. A parent might encourage their child to pursue wealth and success at any cost, even if it means compromising integrity. A sibling might encourage bitterness and unforgiveness instead of reconciliation. A spouse might pressure their partner into choices that violate their conscience. The enemy knows that family is meant to be a place of strength and protection, so he works to turn it into a source of temptation and spiritual weakness. One of the most dangerous aspects of persistent temptation is that it dulls conviction. The more a person is exposed to sin, the less sensitive they become to its dangers. At first, they may feel guilty, hesitant, or uneasy, but over time, they justify it. They convince themselves that it isn't really that bad. They start to believe the voices around them that say times have changed. This is just how the world works, or God understands. The enemy wants nothing more than to weaken a person's spiritual defenses so that they no longer see sin for what it truly is. Persistent temptation also creates confusion. When people are constantly surrounded by messages that contradict what they know to be true, they begin to question their own beliefs. They start to wonder if they're being too strict, too old-fashioned, or too judgmental. They begin to adopt a mindset that blends truth with compromise, thinking they can balance both. But the enemy knows that compromise is just another word for surrender. He knows that a divided heart cannot stand strong. The most effective way the enemy works through temptation is through repetition. He does not give up after one attempt. He keeps pressing, keeps offering, keeps providing opportunities for a person to fall. He studies weaknesses and attacks them relentlessly. If he sees that a person is prone to anger, he surrounds them with people who provoke them. If he knows a person struggles with lust, he makes sure temptation is always within reach. If he sees that a person has a weakness for approval, he fills their life with people who challenge their convictions. The goal is not just to tempt once, but to tempt again and again until resistance is broken. The power of persistent temptation is in its ability to wear a person down. Even the strongest can grow tired. Even the most faithful can begin to question. That is why discernment is so important. Not every voice deserves to be listened to. Not every relationship should be embraced. Not every opportunity is from God. Recognizing when someone is being used as an instrument of temptation, even unknowingly, is crucial. The enemy will use whoever he can, and sometimes that means the very people we love the most. Temptation is one of the oldest weapons of the enemy, and its power lies in its persistence. It does not always come in the form of an obvious attack, but often through the steady and subtle influence of the people closest to us. The devil understands that a single moment of weakness can open a door, but he also knows that continuous exposure to temptation will eventually wear down even the strongest of convictions. He does not always attack in grand, dramatic ways. Instead, he works through whispers, through small compromises, through repeated influences that seem harmless at first, but eventually lead to spiritual destruction. The people in our lives have the power to shape our thoughts, behaviors, and decisions. The enemy knows this and often uses friends, family members, and even respected figures to lead people astray. Sometimes it is intentional, as when someone actively encourages sinful behavior, mocking those who try to live righteously. Other times, it is unintentional, as when someone unknowingly becomes a vessel for temptation simply by normalizing behavior that goes against God's will. A friend who constantly pushes sinful indulgence, a relative who dismisses the importance of faith, a co-worker who pressures others to compromise their values. These are all ways the enemy works through influence. Temptation does not always appear as something clearly wrong. More often than not, it comes disguised as something reasonable or justifiable. It might come in the form of an opportunity that seems too good to pass up, even if it requires bending the truth or compromising integrity. It might come in the form of a relationship that feels right, even if it slowly pulls a person away from their faith. It might come in the form of entertainment, ideas, or conversations that seem harmless, but over time reshape a person's thinking, leading them further from truth and closer to deception. The enemy is patient. He knows that if he cannot pull someone down in one moment, he can do it over time. Persistent temptation works by gradually changing the way a person sees right and wrong. At first, there is resistance. The conscience speaks clearly, warning that something is not right. But as temptation continues, as the same voices keep speaking, as the same influences remain, that resistance weakens. What once seemed completely unacceptable becomes tolerable. What once caused guilt no longer stirs any conviction. The person who once stood firm begins to waver, and the battle is already half lost. One of the most effective ways the enemy uses persistent temptation is through relationships. The people we love and trust have the greatest ability to influence us, and the enemy knows that if he can reach someone through a close friend, a romantic partner, or even a family member, he has a better chance of leading them astray. This is why so many find themselves slowly drifting from their faith, not because they made one drastic decision, but because they allowed small compromises to creep in through the people around them. A friend might encourage behavior that once seemed wrong, but now feels normal. A loved one might pressure someone to accept things that go against their faith under the guise of love or understanding. Little by little, the influence works, and before they realize it, they are no longer standing where they once stood. Persistent temptation also comes in the form of cultural and societal pressures. The world is constantly sending messages that contradict God's truth. Media, entertainment, and popular opinion all work together to reshape morality, to make sin seem acceptable, and to make righteousness seem outdated or extreme. The enemy does not need to convince people to reject God overnight. He simply needs to surround them with enough voices that challenge their beliefs until they begin to question them on their own. This is why many people who once stood strong in their faith find themselves compromising over time, not because they made a conscious decision to turn away, but because they allowed too many competing influences to shape their thinking. The enemy also understands the power of repetition. He knows that the more a person is exposed to temptation, the more likely they are to give in. A single moment of temptation may be easy to resist, but when the same temptation presents itself over and over again, it becomes harder to ignore. A person who repeatedly hears the same justifications for sin may eventually start to believe them. A person who is constantly surrounded by those who engage in ungodly behavior may begin to see it as normal. This is how the enemy operates, not through a single attack, but through relentless pressure. Another dangerous aspect of persistent temptation is that it creates confusion. When someone is exposed to too many opposing influences, they begin to question what is right and wrong. They start to wonder if they are being too rigid, if their beliefs are outdated, or if they are missing out on something better. The enemy loves to create doubt, to make a person feel isolated in their convictions, to make them believe that standing for truth will cost them more than they are willing to pay. The danger of persistent temptation is that it does not demand immediate surrender. It simply asks for one small compromise at a time. It does not always appear as an enemy, but often comes through familiar voices, trusted relationships, and appealing opportunities. The enemy knows that he does not need to win the battle in a day. He just needs to weaken the foundation over time. He is patient, he is strategic, and he will use every influence available to pull people away from what is right. Recognizing this is the first step to standing firm. Not every voice should be listened to. Not every relationship is meant to be followed. Not every opportunity is from God. The enemy works through those who are willing, whether they realize it or not. And the only way to resist is through discernment, vigilance, and unwavering faith. The battle against temptation is not won through willpower alone, but through a deep connection to truth. The enemy will persist, but those who remain rooted in what is right will not be easily swayed. Truth is not always easy to accept. It challenges, convicts, and demands change. Many people, when confronted with truth, embrace it with humility, recognizing their need for transformation. But there are others who reject it outright, not because they do not see it, but because they refuse to submit to it. The rejection of truth is one of the clearest signs of spiritual deception, and when it becomes persistent, it is evidence of a heart that is hardening against the very voice of God. The enemy has always worked to distort, deny, and destroy truth. From the very beginning, in the Garden of Eden, he questioned what God had said, planting seeds of doubt in the human heart. That same tactic is still used today. When people reject truth, it is often not because they do not recognize it, but because they have been influenced by voices that contradict it. They may have once believed, once stood firm, once had conviction, but over time, they allowed themselves to listen to opinions, ideologies, and deceptions that made them question what they once knew to be right. One of the greatest dangers of rejecting truth is that it does not happen all at once. It begins with small compromises. A person hears something that goes against what they have been taught, and instead of rejecting it, they entertain the thought. They start to question whether absolute truth exists, whether morality is really fixed, whether God's standards are as unchanging as they once believed. The enemy does not need to force them into complete rebellion. He only needs to plant doubt. From there, rejection of truth becomes a slow but steady process. Another reason people reject truth is that it exposes sin. The Word of God is a mirror revealing what is hidden in the heart. Some, when faced with conviction, humble themselves and seek repentance. Others, however, resist, unwilling to admit that they are wrong. The more they resist, the harder their hearts become. They no longer feel the weight of conviction because they have silenced the voice that once warned them. What once would have made them feel uneasy no longer stirs their conscience. The enemy works to desensitize, making sin seem normal, acceptable, and even desirable. Pride is often at the root of rejecting truth. Many do not want to admit they need correction. They convince themselves that they are wise, that they have figured out life on their own terms, that they do not need to be told what is right and wrong. They surround themselves with others who affirm their way of thinking, rejecting anyone who challenges them. The enemy thrives in this kind of pride because it blinds a person to their own need for change. The more they resist truth, the more they believe they are right, and the deeper they fall into deception. Another sign of rejecting truth is when people begin to distort it to fit their desires. Instead of surrendering to what is right, they attempt to twist it into something that aligns with their lifestyle. They justify sinful behavior by claiming that truth is relative, that times have changed, that God is too loving to judge. They pick and choose what they want to believe, accepting the parts that make them feel good while ignoring the parts that convict them. This is one of the most dangerous forms of rejection because it still has the appearance of spirituality, but at its core, it is a rejection of God's authority. Conviction is a gift. It is the voice of God, calling people to repentance, to transformation, to a life that is free from the chains of sin. But when conviction is repeatedly ignored, it begins to fade. The person who once felt guilty for lying no longer feels any remorse. The person who once struggled with sinful thoughts now embraces them without hesitation. The person who once knew the danger of compromise now sees no problem with it. The heart becomes calloused, and the enemy takes full advantage of that spiritual numbness. One of the clearest signs of rejecting truth is hostility toward those who speak it. When someone has fully embraced deception, they no longer tolerate correction. They become defensive, angry, even aggressive toward anyone who challenges them. They mock righteousness, ridicule those who live by faith, and seek to silence the voices that remind them of the truth they are trying to escape. The enemy fuels this hostility because he knows that the more people fight against truth, the deeper they entrench themselves in darkness. Another tragic result of rejecting truth is the loss of discernment. When a person repeatedly ignores conviction, their ability to recognize deception diminishes. They begin to embrace false teachings, believing whatever aligns with their desires. They fall for philosophies that sound appealing but are empty of real wisdom. They become drawn to leaders who tell them what they want to hear instead of what they need to hear. The enemy loves to blind people, making them think they are enlightened when, in reality, they are walking in darkness. Rejecting truth ultimately leads to bondage. The very thing people think will bring them freedom, living without rules, following their own desires, rejecting God's authority, becomes a thing that enslaves them. They become trapped in addictions, destructive behaviors, and broken relationships. They seek fulfillment, but never find it. They chase happiness, but are left empty. The enemy promises freedom through rebellion, but in the end, all he delivers is chains. But there is hope. Truth does not change, no matter how many reject it. Conviction can still reach even the hardest of hearts. But the longer truth is rejected, the harder it becomes to return to it. That is why it is so important to recognize when someone is falling into deception, to see the signs before they are completely lost. The enemy is relentless, but those who stand firm in truth will not be easily swayed. Those who reject truth may think they are walking their own path, but in reality, they are being led by a force they do not even recognize. The battle for truth is real, and the cost of rejecting it is far greater than many realize. Life that is truly led by the Spirit of God produces evidence. Just as a healthy tree bears good fruit, a person who walks in obedience to God will display qualities that reflect his character: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. These are the unmistakable marks of a heart that has been transformed by God's presence. But when these qualities are absent, it is a sign that something is deeply wrong. The absence of the fruits of the Spirit is not just a personality flaw or a lack of effort. It is a spiritual condition that reveals a heart that is either disconnected from God or under the influence of something else. One of the first and most obvious signs is the absence of love. True godly love is selfless, sacrificial, and unconditional. It does not seek its own gain, but rather the good of others. It forgives, even when it is difficult. It serves, even when it is inconvenient. When a person lacks this kind of love, it becomes evident in their relationships. They are easily offended, holding on to grudges instead of extending grace. They are selfish, always seeking what benefits them rather than what blesses others. They manipulate and deceive rather than walking in truth. Where the Spirit of God is, love will always be present. But when love is absent, it is a sign that something else is at work. Another sign is the absence of joy. The joy of the Lord is not dependent on circumstances. It is a deep and abiding confidence in God's goodness. But when joy is missing, it is replaced by frustration, bitterness, and discontentment. A person without joy is never satisfied. No matter what they achieve, no matter what they gain, they always feel empty. They complain more than they give thanks. They focus on what is wrong rather than what is good. They chase after temporary pleasures but never find lasting fulfillment. When joy is absent, it is a sign that a person has been cut off from the source of true satisfaction. Peace is another fruit that cannot be faked. True peace is not just the absence of conflict. It is a deep assurance that God is in control. It guards the heart and mind, keeping fear and anxiety from taking over. But when peace is absent, worry and chaos take its place. A person who lacks peace is restless, always seeking but never finding. They are constantly troubled, driven by fear and doubt. They lash out at others because they have no inner stability. They create division instead of unity, stirring up strife rather than seeking reconciliation. The absence of peace is a clear sign that a person is either resisting God's will or allowing another influence to dominate their heart. Patience is another fruit that should be evident in the life of someone who walks with God. True patience is not just about waiting. It is about trusting God's timing without frustration or resentment. A patient person does not give up easily. They endure hardships without losing faith. They handle difficult people with grace rather than anger. But when patience is missing, it is replaced by impulsiveness, irritability, and a short temper. A person who lacks patience is easily frustrated, quick to lash out, and unwilling to endure difficulties without complaining. Their relationships suffer because they do not extend grace to others. Their decisions are reckless because they do not wait on God. The absence of patience reveals a heart that is controlled by fleshly desires rather than the Spirit of God.